Welcome, everyone. We have about 18 people here, which is fantastic. And I'm sure we're going to have some more people joining us. My name is Heather Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director at the Cameron Art Museum. We're going to get started. If you could, just for now, while Elizabeth and I are talking, if you could mute yourself and turn off your video, we'll have a time for questions at the end when you can turn on your videos and we can look at everyone. I wanted to introduce Elizabeth first and we'll get started. Um, Elizabeth Bradford is one of those rare artists whose work can help us to see the world more clearly. Bradford is a recorder and an observer, and by spending time with her paintings in a house of one room, I have been challenged to look intently at the beauty in the familiar world around me. The sky lightening at dawn, the varied yellows of the daffodils, glossy from the rain in my yard, and the shimmer of puddles on the asphalt in the morning light. Bradford's exhibition is a gift to us right now during the pandemic, a chance to see the natural world in all of its beauty through her eyes at the museum, and it's juxtaposed beautifully with Robert Johnson's work. So we're going to have a conversation and then we'll open the floor up to questions. Welcome, Elizabeth. We are so grateful to have you here today. And I wanted to start by asking you, I always ask people, how old were you when you started making art? And how old were you when you started, when making art became a connection for you with the natural world?
Thanks so much for doing this, Heather, and thanks everyone who has taken time out to be here this morning. I don't remember a time when I wasn't hooked by image making. My grandmother at the farm where I live now used to give me food coloring and a basting brush and some butcher paper, and I would work with that. And Mom in church gave us pipe cleaners to sculpt with to keep us quiet. So it was like my environment always invited that kind of mark making and art making. And the natural world piece, I've always been, of course, engaged with the idea of the land. But when I started the ultralight backpacking about 10 years ago, I guess, something like that, it changed the work. It really altered the way I work and the way I felt about it. It exposed me to sort of more magical sense of the world than I had before. So that's, I guess, the answer to that question.
And I know we were talking earlier about your relationship to the land that you currently live on, that was your grandparents' land. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, it's an old family farm. It was my great-grandfather's farm. He purchased it in 1890. It was a mile or two away from the farm he grew up on, which we got from the Lord's proprietors in the 1700s. So he moved around the corner and bought this place in 1890 and raised his children there. And my grandfather was born in the bedroom I sleep in, and then my father was born in the bedroom I sleep in. So as a little kid, my grandparents were still farming it, and I lived in town when they still lived there. I lived in town in first in a little rental house my parents had, and then in the house they built. And it was all very nice. It was 4 walls and a window onto the street. But when you'd go to the farm, there would be like 1,000 stimuli. It was just remarkable. Everything about it was a sensory overload. Beautiful deep dappled shade. I remember somebody with a basket full of strawberries that they just picked. I remember the sounds of, as the little film says, sounds of, the first thing you'd hear in the morning would be the cows or a rooster. So you'd be in bed and the farm would start waking up and you'd be hearing the farm all around you. It wasn't like being in town at the house where maybe you'd hear a lawnmower. but all these wonderful sounds. And then my grandmother was this impeccable housekeeper, so everything was starched and ironed and spotless and smelled clean. And you'd come downstairs from your bedroom in the morning and you'd smell the bacon from their own pigs cooking, and everything about it was exquisite and ratcheted up from normal suburban life. It's like 2 or 3 levels above that. And so it just captured my imagination and the imagination of my brother. So the two of us, as soon as we were able, as soon as we were old enough, went out there and started sort of homesteading. And we both have been there ever since.
And this is where you live now and your studio is now.
Yes, that building, the bigger building, was they called it the Cotton Barn. And it was basically what you see now, only completely decrepit. In the little film, there's an image of it 30 years before I restored it. But it's just a nice big open space where I can make large work. There you go.
So tell us about the interior of your studio.
Okay, it's kind of cluttered in this image, but it's just a big cavernous space. And I had a friend right when I was in the middle of redoing it. My son started the restoration process in high school on his own. He was going to make a music studio out of it because he was he did recorded people. And so he was going to make a recording studio. So it doesn't have any concessions to getting the light right. It wasn't intended for that. But then he went off to college, and I suddenly realized after 5 years, he was not ever going to come home again. And the recording studio was just going to sit there half finished. So I bought him out of his recording studio and completed the restoration. The shutters you see in the background are doors to closets. They are from the 1881 church that my family attended, and they were removed and replaced with new imitations of themselves. And I was lucky enough that my former husband rescued them from the dump or whatever and brought them home. And they're just gorgeous. You can't tell from this picture, but they're 10 feet tall and something like that, maybe 9 feet tall. And they make doors to the back of the building. And I had a friend who was an architect at the time who just in the middle of the restoration project came in and said, "Oh, you got this all wrong. You need to do this and this and this." And so I ended up adding windows where he told me and making some alterations I'm really glad I made. But
Love it.
a nice big barny space. The floor is original lumber that was the floor in this barn. And it was gorgeous 11 and 12-inch wide pine boards that were cut off the farm and milled in our own sawmill back in the 1880s. So I had them planed and reinstalled as the flooring. You can't tell much about that in this picture, but it's nice. It's a good,
Unbelievable.
very happy space.
Esther says it's cluttered as it should be.
Exactly. It would be a little weird if it was all tidy, wouldn't it?
So I want to get this next question out of the way just so everyone has some context, but can you tell us a little bit about your career path? You went to UNC Chapel Hill. What did you study? How did you end up, where you are today?
Well, I have to give credit first to my first college. I started off at Randolph-Macon Women's College, and they had a small but strong art department and gave me a good beginning. And when I left there, I had every intention of being an art major, and transferred in my junior year to Carolina. And the art department was dominated by male abstract expressionists. And I have done some abstract painting, but in my soul, heart and soul, I kind of really love observing and replicating what I see. I really love representation. Even the dishes I eat off are trompe l'oeil. So it's like I'm kind of obsessed with things that look like things. So that was not a welcome stance to take at Carolina at that time. And so I ended up ditching it because I loved the English department. It was really strong and I loved to write. So I became an English major and then went to a year of graduate school in the English department and had Louis Rubin as a professor, just like killer professors. I could still quote parts of lectures Louis Rubin gave. He's just an amazing professor. And so just stayed with the English for a while and graduated. And then at some point, a year or so after that, I realized I was grieving the loss of color and texture and paint in my hands and the visceral, tactile quality of making art that way. So I reached out to someone I knew was new on the faculty at Davidson. Herb Jackson had just graduated from the graduate program at Carolina and was a young professor, in his 20s. And so I just phoned him up and said, I told him about how I felt and what my experience had been. And he was like, come on over and take a senior studio with me and see what that does for you. Well, it was completely life-changing. It was really a super rich experience and probably the fastest leap in growth I've ever had as an artist. Just, in those weeks to have my whole mind changed, the whole world turned around. So I've been sort of working off of that ever since.
Well, and that leads into my next question. I know Anne Brennan here also studied with Herb Jackson, but I wanted to ask, who has influenced your work? It sounds like Herb Jackson absolutely has. What artists along the way have influenced your work?
Well, I had a lot. Living in Davidson or outside of Davidson was really fun because there was always great stuff coming into the college that I could go and see. Great lectures, artists from all over. I was influenced, I'm sure, by Russ Warren as well, who's a terrific artist, living in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I studied lithography with him twice and just had a lot of fun. He was a good friend too. And the graphic power of his work was really, I'm sure, is evident in the way I work. And I live with some of his work. In fact, I was so passionate about it that at one point I made sure that each of my children will inherit a Russ Warren piece when I am gone, because he's just super. It just carves a painting. It's very tough-minded and almost like carved.
Yeah.
That's a weird way to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand though.
Yeah.
Talking about works that you live with, this is one painting that I told Elizabeth earlier. I think all of us here at the museum have separately said, well, we'd like to live with this one. But I know you live with this one. Can you tell us about this painting and why you love it?
Heather showed me this and said, oh, this is one of my favorites. And I said, it's my favorite. It's hard to have favorites because I really do love most of that show. And I would happily live with most of that show. But this one, just something about it struck this chord in me and I could not let it go. There's not enough money to buy this for me. So I told Heather I gave it to my son so that I would never be tempted to sell it. And his house is too small for it. So it lives with me. It hangs in my bedroom. And it has a lot of the paintings experiment with reflective paint. And this one has some reflective paint in it, which makes it, if I come in the bedroom at dusk when the light's really low, it just has this wonderful glow. You don't see that glow during the daylight hours or when it's brightly lit, but when the light is low, it has this wonderful, evocative kind of glow. So I love that painting a lot too.
Can you tell us about the experience of painting this painting? I know we were talking earlier about my feeling when I encounter this painting is that I feel that feeling that you often feel in nature, of that kind of sense of oneness, that connectedness with the world. And that's what I feel when I look at this. Can you tell us where you were and describe
Sure.
the process of creation of this
Sure.
one?
Sure. Somebody asked the best question this weekend when I was giving all those talks. Somebody said, do you work from memory? Do you work from photographs? And the answer surprised even me. As I stood there trying to parcel out what I was going to say, I realized that I do use photographic studies to work from, but that I work very powerfully from the memory of the experience. And so the memory, and I also said, if I leave too long between the experience and the doing of the painting, I lose that. I lose that thing in my heart and soul that I hope comes out in the painting. I get disconnected from it. So this piece was the result of 3 days spent in the Adirondacks. We went on a canoe camping trip. A bunch of us drove up to upstate New York and took our boats with us. And actually we took my friend's canoes because we needed to haul a lot of gear, and you can't put a lot of gear in the kayak I have. So we piled on the gear, and my friend said, who always leads these treks, said, be sure you bring a camp chair. You're going to need it. And I was like, really? So I went and got a little tiny camp chair, packed it, and we took off in our canoes, loaded down with gear and food. And we went to this remote little island. I guess it was an island. It was hard to tell whether it was an island or what, but it was isolated feeling out in the middle of this lake, this giant lake called Lake Lila. And it had this forest where we were camping, but there was this spit of land, well, actually rock, that jutted out from the land and was maybe, I don't know, 100 yards, I don't know, 50, I have hard to measure distance, 50 yards maybe long, just like a big peninsula. And we set our chairs out on that rock face and just sat there for 3 days. And we would cook our meals out there on the rock, and we would just sit there and we would watch the sun move from one side of the rock to the other and set on the other side. And so just, it's amazing to me that for 3 days you can be completely entertained by doing nothing but just sitting there and watching water and sky. But we did. Occasionally we would hop in the boat and paddle around and explore, but there was a lot of just sitting there. And one of the days it rained. And so this is rain falling on Lake Lila. And there were these weird little reeds sticking up out of the water that created all kinds of cool special effects, both when it was raining and when it was not raining. So they are a feature. If you removed the weird little reeds, I'm not sure the painting would have the same resonance that it has. But I hope this is filled with peace of being in that spot for a long, uninterrupted time with people I care about and people with whom I am also at peace.
I absolutely feel that when I look at this. And I also, it is representational, but it's also, there's abstraction here as well. Can you talk about that? Because that's something I see a lot in your work.
Sure. I call it abstract realism. And one of my favorite hashtags to use is real, not real. I like especially I love water because it gives me a lot of opportunities to go off on an insane abstract tangent and still have you completely believe in the veracity of the work and still have you connected to the real world without question, although there's insane stuff happening. And so I love blending the two. I'm trying to talk about magic, magic that lives with us that we usually miss. And I'm trying to bump it up so that you don't miss it anymore once you've seen it. And I hear this a lot. People say, oh, after I see this that you've painted, I see this stand of weeds differently. So I think every artist wants to change the way people view the world in some way or another. And that's certainly one of my subversive goals, is to affect, if not change, your perceptions like mine have been changed.
I love it. I wanted to look at this one. There's so many vines and trees and roots in your work. And for me, this is very grounding when I look at your work. Um, it's very, there's a rootedness to it. And I'm just wondering, how does being in nature or painting from nature, how does that ground or steady you? Oops.
Well, I think the farm grounds me a lot. And when I go out in nature, like, in this pandemic and stuff, we went camping twice this winter in the middle of the pandemic. And to leave the world and all its confusion behind, and maybe the world's in total crisis when I left, but you step into the forest where you're not going to see another person for days. There are no other people there. And you step into the forest and it's like everything slips into perspective. And you realize the smallness and the pettiness and the stupidity of most of what you left behind, and the enormity and the grace and the magic and the, of course, beauty of what you're stepping into. And it's so reassuring. It's like, whew, this is what's real, and that's what's not real. And it's just a good perspective shift. I also feel like, oh, I'm home at last when I do that, when I make that shift, when I leave. Even though I love my home, it's on a busy highway and there's persistent noise, and it's in a very busy area, very popular place to live. And so it's a buzz. It's always a buzz. And so to step into someplace that's not a buzz is just reassuring and grounding and peaceful and nourishing.
I'm struck so much by what you just said because it's so much what Robert Johnson also says about his series and safe places,
Mhm.
that for him going to the natural park, like what you said about real, not real, right?
Yeah.
Getting back to the state parks for him was getting away from the outside world and getting back
Mm,
um, to something that is real, right, and
right.
essential. Um, I'm gonna try to talk about this, and I know we talked about it earlier, but and it's hard to articulate without sounding kind of hokey. But there is such a spiritual representation of nature for me when I look at your work. And you've talked about your paintings as existential landscapes. Um, can you talk a little bit about that? And I'm curious too about what do your paintings of nature also tell us about our relationships as humans to the earth?
Mm. Um, Part of me thinks that the natural world is far more powerful than we are, and that we only have the illusion of control, and that it will destroy us before we destroy it. Partly, I hope that's true. I'm not so sure some days. Um, Existential landscape. Under, I think the whole time I'm painting this, I'm also thinking about life and death. I'm thinking about where did we come from? Where are we going? This is the origin story. This is Eden before we screwed it up. Um, and this is the scraps that are left of Eden, because a whole lot of Eden's trampled over and destroyed. But there are places um, tucked away that nobody's gotten to yet, nobody's discovered yet, that hark back to Eden. And I get really hung up on that parable, that origin story as it connects to our own. Um, that's sort of a lame answer, Heather. I'm sorry. I kind of lost the thread there.
That's not a lame answer at all. I think it's beautiful. Cynthia asked a beautiful question in the chat box. That's perhaps a better articulation than I was going to ask it. What is your experience of time when you're working in a piece? I love that question so much. Thank you, Cynthia.
That's a great question, Cynthia. And it really comes down to brain science when you are working in when you're painting, you're leaning heavily on your right brain, and your right brain, and if you do it every day, all day, 40 hours a week like I do, you become kind of right brained. And that's mutable. If I took a job at the bank and worked with money all day, every day for 40 hours, I would trend the other way. But because I do this all day, every day, and even dream about it at night, I tend to the right brain. And the right brain is wordless and timeless. So you absolutely lose all track of time if the painting's good. If you're not having a good day, then you check the clock a lot. But most days it's like, oh my gosh, it's already lunchtime. Oh my gosh, the morning vanished and it seemed like it was an hour. I came out here at 8, it can't be noon, but it is. And then it's wordless, which is lovely because to leave language behind sometimes is just a blessing. And it's funny because you can do two parallel things. Since you're working with the right brain and it's wordless and timeless, I can, if you were to, I detest the phone, but were I to have a phone conversation while I'm painting, I might pick up the phone and set down the brush for a minute, but I would find myself in a minute painting while talking and making decisions about the painting while talking. And it's like these two halves are working independently of one another, and there's no crossover. It's a weird thing, but yeah, timeless for sure.
That's incredible. Esther also had a question, which I was going to ask too. Do you ever work from photos? And then to go with that, I wanted to ask, do you ever paint plein air?
I work from photos often. Have spent years doing nothing but working straight from nature outdoors. But to do these complicated pieces, particularly where water's concerned, water only stays in position for about a nanosecond. So you have to freeze it. And so what I do is none of these paintings is the product of one photograph. Most of them are the synthesis of many photographs. Sometimes dozens of photographs, sometimes 3, sometimes 30. The painting that has the birds roosting from Baldhead, the Twilight painting, there were probably several hundred photographs taken as studies for that painting. I had to get my son to take them because he's a great photographer and has a good camera, and my camera wasn't fast enough to photograph birds in flight without and to get any degree of accuracy. They were just sort of blurry and weird. So they're the product of many photographs that are synthesized, and the synthesizing of disparate photographs for me is 10 times harder than painting from life outdoors, because outdoors it's sitting there in place and all you have to do is render it. But trying to make the perspective from this piece jive with the perspective from this piece, trying to make the space a believable space is to me really hard, but fun.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you too, I know we talked about a little bit about this earlier, about your use of color. Um, I've been in the gallery with other painters who just, it- your use of color is surprising often. I think I used the word revelatory. Can you talk about color in your paintings?
Sure. One thing that people, especially painters, think is strange is that I don't always mix paint. I paint straight out of the jar a lot. Um, I purchase every single color that's made, every single one. And if I find out there's one missing that I didn't know about, I order it immediately. And in different ranges, there are different styles of paint. There are different colors, and I make sure I get all the colors from all the other ranges too. So I possess all these colors, and I don't have to mix everything. I like speed. I don't want to waste half the day mixing up a color. I want to be making marks instead of mixing color. Because the work is built on millions of marks. That's one way for me to be more efficient. I don't always know what color to use. I just know to experiment. And I know when when the hair stands up on the back of your neck that you got it right. But a lot of times the color's wrong. And what stalls the completion of a painting is that fact. And so I will continue to glaze over colors or, change them, just radically change them until I find harmony in the piece. I like to use unexpected colors or to look at something and see the sort of hidden color in it. If you were to render the gray of this tree trunk, if you were to stare at it, what does it trend toward? Does it a lot of times for me, it trends toward lavender. It's like finding what's almost there, but not quite there. And if you just pushed it, would be there. And so that's what I do.
There's some more lavender. That's an amazing description, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, are your paintings political? What do you hope that viewers take away from experiencing your exhibition?
They are political, and I'm just old enough and cranky enough that you don't want to get me started on that. I can make enemies for you. Don't do that. But no, I think at its base, a lot of the changes I've made recently were about an awakening, a feminist awakening. I've always been a feminist. I had the initial copy to Ms. Magazine delivered to me. I mean, I had the first subscription ever. I mean, that first magazine, I had the subscription that year. So I've always been a feminist, but it hasn't been real for me until now, until the last few years, when I realized the just dumbness that half the world is repressed so that the other half of the world feels okay about themselves. I mean, and that's a gross generalization. I wouldn't say that about all men. I have been nurtured and mentored and carried on the backs of many men too. But, somebody asked me about, could he get a discount on my work? I said, because I'm a woman, you're already getting a 15% discount, and so there's that. So there's the feminist thing. I am losing your audio. Wait a minute. Okay, I've lost audio with you.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
You're back. You're back.
Okay.
Another thing along that line is I realized at one point a lot of the stuff I'm rebelling against was self-imposed.
Sure.
Restrictions I put on myself.
Yes.
The culture urged them.
Yes.
The culture set me up for that, but I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and I didn't start to shake it off until the last few years, the last decade.
Yeah.
And to step outside of it and refuse to participate in it. And one thing had to do with scale. I think I always had a timid scale. I had a much smaller studio and I worked small scale. Occasionally I would do 2 or 3 really large scale paintings a year, but I did a whole lot. The bulk of the work was small. And I think for me, part of it was saying, I deserve to use scale.
Absolutely.
Scale goes with ego, I think, a lot of times. I think people who are not great artists but have giant egos do giant paintings. And so I think part of me was afraid to assert my ego to the point that I made large work. And so that's been a thing. I don't make small work anymore.
That's a brave choice.
It was stepping out of the box. And these things get okay. Another expression is, and this was pointed out to me by a brilliant man, is that you can't enter my landscapes in the normal route. Like, pull up 50 landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll invite you in. But mine have usually a wall in front between you and it. And in this case, it's brambles and spiderweb.
Wow.
And so there is usually something that's almost like cage-like, a fence-like, that's holding us away from the world. So as we go through these, it's not true of Lake Lila, but particularly in these that I call tapestries, these paintings where there are lots of interwoven bits and pieces, you're held at bay. So that's a sort of a subversive way of saying, I've been behind this fence for a long time. And then, of course, there is this preachment about the natural world and my horror at the loss of public lands, and my horror at the loss of native lands, and the complete refusal to accept the sacredness of these unspoiled places, just the complete lack of connection. I often think about some of the people who are masterminding these moves. You have never sat on the ground with your back against a tree in your life. You have never, except maybe if you fell down on the golf course, you have never sat on the ground with your back to a tree, So there's that. And that's, I think, comes across as fairly obvious theme.
That's so interesting what you said about the brambles as keeping,
Isn't it? Not original.
I love that, but I have a different experience when I look at this. I feel protected
Oh,
by the brambles, almost in the way that when you're a kid, maybe it's because of the background knowledge of my experience in the woods, right? Like how you look for those spaces that are kind of cozy, and you feel connected to the earth and maybe separated from the right, real, not real. You feel separated from the rest of the world and closer to nature. So that's my first impulse when I look at this.
I like that. That's great. And I will sit with that, Heather. That's a very interesting observation. And I have to credit Richard Mashal, who used to be the art critic for the Charlotte Observer, with that insight about the fence, the obstructions. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, can you talk to us about this one? This is another one that we all just love.
Sure. This one is from Merchant's Mill Pond. I don't know if you know Merchant's Mill Pond, but it's out on the coastal plain, and we go there to kayak a lot and camp. And it's just a crazy swamp land. And of course, it's just this watery universe with all these little tiny islands created where trees come up through the water, and then soil collects around the trees and forms tiny islands everywhere. And each of the islands will be inhabited by some creature. So, it's its own little ecosystem. But paddling around Merchants, you just see these crazy things in the mirror of the water. And this is one of those. And Anne pointed out, which really gripped me, that Anne pointed out that the place where the pebbles dropped or whatever and caused the ripples to come out in a circle, that those are like mandalas. Places of meditation, sunk into the center of the piece. And there's lots of duckweed on Merchant's Mill Pond. And when I looked, it's like the trees inverted, the sky's in the water. And I started thinking about the cosmos, and I thought about if this were, the cosmos, the duckweed is like constellations. So it's got the title Duckweed as Constellations.
I love it. I love it. Donna asked, your compositions are so complex. Do you work out structure through drawing and then paint, or does a piece evolve in concert? What is the first mark made on a large canvas?
Oh, that's such a great question. Sometimes, like if you look at this painting, it's the big compositional element is that black tree trunk, inverted tree trunk. So when a lot of times when I'm working with one or two trees as the primary subject, getting those forms just right is really not easy. Even though it's just a rectangle or a curve, it's really a pretty simple form. Getting it to be just so involves a lot of thought and movement. And sometimes at the end of the painting, I'm still adjusting those big forms. So I will usually draw them with a pencil and then redraw them and redraw them and redraw them. And I will use a pencil to anchor the primary forms. And then the smaller stuff, I'll just kind of wing it, basically.
I know I know everybody else is dying to ask questions, but I just have two more.
Sure.
um, I did not know that Louis Rubin was your teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And that makes so much sense to me now. Just with the way your work resonates for me and your expression of the South. You are definitely, to me as a writer, you're definitely telling a story. I want to know, what do you read? What do you write? And what's on your bedside table right now?
I love to write. It's funny, the left brain, right brain thing I was telling you about. When I am working so hard in my right brain, 40 hours a week, I tend to not write because it's an alternate thing. I'm not honing the left brain. I'm not giving it the exercise it needs. So to write something is tough for me when I'm painting
Yeah.
all the time. When I take a vacation and go away and I'm not painting and I'm not in the studio and I may be traveling, I start writing because that part of my brain gets activated. So right now there's a long hiatus in my writing, in my blogging, because I'm painting all the time. But I do love blogging because it's like the book that never ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's a memoir. It helps me. It's almost like a online diary. Like I can't remember where was I camping when I did that, and I can go back and I've got the whole thing spelled out for me, in this blog about. So I usually blog about the places I go more than anything else. I read. Right now, my bedside table is overloaded with a pile of books about the natural world. I've got Overstory that you and I talked about,
Mm-hmm.
which I've just stopped reading for now because I want to read it.
Sounds
Like
good.
I can tell. I've read just enough to be like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. I'm reading a book about mosses by a PhD in mosses. Um, I'm reading a book about Elizabeth Lawrence's garden in Charlotte, North Carolina. She was a famous horticulturist. Somebody gave me a beautiful book about gardening from Britain that I'm reading. It's like this, but I love fiction. I just finished Garganus's Alan
Oh,
Garganus
Alan Gurganus. I love him.
newest collection of
Oh,
stuff I just ordered and read. I just read that and I
yeah.
ordered Braiding Sweet Grasses, which I haven't cracked yet. And I also ordered an Alan Garganus book called White People,
Oh,
because
that's a good
you
one
can
too.
resist a title like
Yeah,
White People.
that's a good one too. Yeah.
So that's what's on the bedside table.
Oh,
And I really don't get to read but 15 or 20 minutes a day.
yeah.
So it's awful. It's slow, very slow.
But you can enjoy it that way. I love that. Okay, so this is my last question, and then we're getting questions in the chat for you. I will let our participants ask questions. But so if you could invite three artists, and I'm going to revise this a little bit. If you could invite three artists or writers, living or dead, for dinner at your farm, of course, who would you invite?
This is so funny. You gave me this question in advance. I'm going to say that I knew this question was coming in advance, and I thought about it hard. And I thought, well, you could have Monet, but
Mm.
he's too arrogant. I don't think I would have put up with his arrogance. And then I thought, you could have Van Gogh. And then I remembered I used to always tell my students that if Van Gogh was in the cafeteria, nobody would sit with him. And so I thought, nah, Van Gogh wouldn't mix with the group well. And then I thought, I'd like to have Ebony Patterson
Mm.
because she fascinates me. Her work fascinates me, and I'd love to just pick her brain. I think I'd like to have Amy Sherrod. I'm real interested in her right now.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to have all the ladies who make G's Bend quilts,
Yes.
the original women who made the G's Bend quilts. But now that you're opening up to writers, definitely Eudora Welty would have to come back from the dead, because I always felt like she was my aunt. She always felt like
Mhm.
somebody from my family.
Yes.
And I always felt I was supposed to meet her, and I never made it happen while she was alive. And so I'm thinking Eudora will have to come back from the dead and be at my dinner party.
Oh,
But I'm cutting out Van Gogh and Monet
that
both.
sounds like the best dinner party
Does
ever. And I can't believe you said that about Eudora Welty, because that's like the feeling that you get about Eudora Welty. That's amazing that you articulated this.
Her,
You're
her picture's hanging over my desk.
Oh, I love her. I love her so much. Um, you're getting so many questions. I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to stop hogging you. Everyone, please, if you want to turn on your video, and we've got some questions. All right, I'm going to read. Cynthia says, when I saw the exhibition, I was struck by the combination of seeing on, seeing in, seeing through, and seeing reflected of, and all of that reminded me of your self-portrait.
Wow, that is such a cool comment. Well done, Cynthia.
Yeah.
uh, that's wild. I never thought of it that way. I do like, I do, I'm aware of seeing the, let's see, how do I say this? I use those reflective paints because they push you out. You can't enter them. They are surface. And I do love the dark pigments like that black tree and that inverted black tree, because you enter those. They are like a cave you walk into. So I am aware of the push pull of reflective paint and flat dark paint. But I hadn't thought about that point of view. Oh, I see some familiar faces. I see some friends.
Oh,
Hi, April.
oh. So Leslie's asked, do you give yourself permission to edit out certain elements in a painting, or do you fully commit to capturing everything?
Oh, definitely edit. Definitely edit. Absolutely. And like for instance, if you've seen the show and you've seen that painting at Bald Head I referred to earlier, it's like dusk and they're roosting birds in the trees, lots of big roosting wading birds. There used to be 3 times as many birds in that painting. And in real life, there were 30 times as many birds, but it just did not work. And so I found when I removed some of those birds, I got a much stronger, more harmonious feeling from that painting. Part of the reason to paint it was the craziness of having so many birds, just like how wildly magical and nutty that was. But it didn't work when I tried to, so I edited it. Absolutely. And just like a good writer, you got to be a good editor.
Yeah, yeah. Even if you're writing nonfiction, sometimes you have to
Totally.
combine characters and things like that. Bonnie asked, I think you said something about spiritual being vertical. I'm gonna have to digest that. During the tour I shared with you. Can you talk a little more about that? She also says, also, I'll be sharing your work this afternoon with a museum tour. Is there anything special you'd like me to share?
Oh, wow. Uh, Not that I can think of, but maybe something will come up. Um, that's just a sort of a fundamental, the qualities of verticality are that it tends to put us in a spiritual mindset. Horizontality tends to put us in a peaceful, restful, calming mindset. Um, so I use those two things to uh, induce a sense of peace or a sense of, to just enhance the sense of spirituality. Yeah. I'm trying to remember that. Zigzags create a sense of nervousness and confusion. So just like knowing how to manipulate those qualities to enhance the message you're trying to get out there. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes so much sense. Well, does anyone else, I know there are more questions. There's so many of us here. There are 23 people here. I'm
Oh,
so happy to see your faces. Um,
I
Please
can't
jump
see you
in.
all. I can see a few people, but I can't see all. Do I click on participants to see it?
You
Yeah.
can click on participants to see everybody's names.
Oh,
I can't see everybody at once either. And then gallery view should give
okay.
you the most people you can see at once.
Okay. Okay. I will content myself with that.
Cynthia says, perfect day for this. St. Patrick's Day, Celtic spirituality speaks of the thin place. Oh,
Oh,
that's
nice.
beautiful. So any more questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask Elizabeth your questions.
I love good questions. Yes.
Sandy has a question.
Elizabeth, I believe you said you went to Randolph-Macon for a bit, and I may be misremembering this, but I think Annie Dillard went there.
Did she?
Oh,
I believe, I know somewhere in Virginia, but her book is one of my favorite books, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And your paintings have the same feel to me as that book.
I've got to go read this book.
I've had it for years, and I think she won a Pulitzer Prize for it. But it's about her walking along the creek near her home and taking a very small space and investing it with a lot of sort of almost like a transcendentalist or a spiritual element. So I think you might enjoy it because your paintings seem so much like that to me.
Sandy, just before this started, Cynthia said the same thing. And I told her I have had a copy of Tinker Creek for years and tried to read it several times and just couldn't get with it. It was my stepbrother's favorite book and he gave it to me. And so I'm going to go home and make another stab at it.
Yeah.
Clearly I need to. I am a Mary Oliver freak.
Oh.
Or I bet several of you are
yes.
too. Clearly, she speaks for me.
And Elizabeth, Annie Dillard studied with Louis Rubin at Hollins. So
oh my God,
you've got to.
That's where she was.
Yeah.
I almost went to Hollins because everybody said great writing school.
Yeah.
And that's probably because Louis Rubin was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I got lucky and had him at Carolina.
Oh, you're so lucky. I have to say, I read Pilgrim and Tinker Creek, just like Cynthia, every few years, but I read it in small doses. You can't read it straight through like you would read a novel or a memoir. It's one that I pick up and I put down and I pick up and put down. You could almost like flip through and pick a page and start there.
And some of her other books I find a little tedious. Her prose is so dense. Heather, I think you have a really good point. You have to pace yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well said.
Her poetry is nice too. More questions.
Elizabeth, I was really hung on when you talked about finding lavender in so many things, because I have a background in physiological psychology and brain science, particularly visual psychophysics. And the lavender blues are the colors in shadows that your rods pick up with just that tiny little bit of cone that's left when it's almost dark out. And so that's actually the color that most people can't see in shadow, but that's the only color that's left in shadow. And that you actually pull that out and that make that an actual cone recognizable. That's a cell in the eye, recognizable color. That's fascinating to me.
Wow.
That you produce that as a color instead of just the tiny little essence of coloration in a shadow.
Wow. I would love to talk to you at great length about color. That's so interesting.
What that says to me is that, one, you have the gift to be able to see that, and you have honed that gift into the skill of being able to pull that color out.
There may be something odd about my perceptual.
That's very cool.
Perceptual abilities. I don't know. I mean, I figure I see things just like everyone else, but I also
no, not true. Different people smell differently. They have a different ability to understand sense differently. Super tasters, and so there are people who actually see things deeper, and that's something that I think probably you have and have honed to a high art.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. Thank you.
We probably have time for 2 more questions.
Anything strike you as curious?
Oh, Leslie, you're muted.
Hi there.
Hi.
Well, first, I want to thank the Cameron for introducing me to you. I don't know a lot about your travels. Have you captured other parts of the United States or overseas at all?
I have been probably spent more time traveling overseas than I have in the United States. I'm embarrassed to tell somebody yesterday I've never been to Memphis or Nashville. So I've got a lot of United States catching up to do.
Ah,
But there are a couple paintings that are inflected by travels in India. I was telling the tours this weekend, I went to India not to paint India, but to just let India affect me, just to sort of let it roll over me. And I came back and 9 days later, I went on a camping trip to Goose Creek, and I came back and painted Goose Creek inflected by India. So it's not a direct transfer. It's just like allowing that saturated color and that pattern to kind of play into my thought processes and come out that way. But yeah, Greece, I did a residency in Greece that was really formative, and a residency in France that was a lot of fun, and not so much in the United States.
It would be really interesting to see how you would experience and what you would do artistically with the stark landscapes of the West, like Arches and Zion and Bryce Canyon, because they're very different. They're not that blooming, buzzing confusion.
Right.
The landscapes that you work so well with.
Right. I'd have to rethink it all. And that is on my short list of stuff that needs to be done before I depart this earth. I've got to do the national parks.
Ooh, that would make a great exhibition.
Wouldn't it?
That would make a great.
Your lips to God's ears.
I have a question for you from September in the chat box. She says, you have a work with the Blue Ridge in the background and a large tree in the foreground. You seemed elevated up in the tree in contrast to being at eye level in the water in a kayak. Can you talk about that mountain view?
Yes, that was a cliff that hung out over mountains, over a huge valley, but it was way up high. We decided to backpack there and spend the night, and there's no water up there. It's very high, so we had to carry water, which is very heavy. So it was kind of an arduous, and the trail was terrible. It's very steep and rutted, lots of runoff. So it was, and you scramble and rocks would be falling under your feet. It was just a tough climb. But we got up there, and it was like, I had the revelation that this is what a Japanese garden is intended to imitate, because it was a naturally occurring Japanese garden with bonsai, stunted trees, little tiny ecosystems of stunted wildflowers and stones and mosses and lichens, all in crevices. But yes, that is a table pine, which is named because it has a kind of a flat habit like a table. And so it's this table pine that looked out over the whole Blue Ridge. And it's one of those edit paintings. I put in so many pine needles that you couldn't tell the Blue Ridge was back there. So I had to edit out tons and tons and tons of pine needles.
Wow.
It was hard making the Blue Ridge show up the way it was supposed to through that tree. Yeah.
Elizabeth, this has been so much fun, and I think I could talk to you all day long. I apologize for hogging her and asking so many questions.
No.
Donna says, I cannot wait to see your work for real, not on a screen. Thank you so much for giving us such personal insight into your roots and reaches.
Thank you all so much for being here, for being present, and for the fascinating things you had to say.
Wonderful
as
question.
much from you as anything.
And I wanted to let everyone know, Elizabeth alluded to a book that we're reading. We are both reading The Overstory by Richard Powers, because we're going to do a book club later during the run of the exhibition. We haven't scheduled it yet, but it's a great book, and we would love to talk about it with you. So more on that coming soon. Bonnie says, thank you so much. This was lovely. Cynthia says, thank you so much. Anne says, this was amazing.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for getting me on this.
I'm glad you made
It was
it.
a struggle, but we got there. Thank you. And
I'm so
Elizabeth was
glad.
wonderful. I've
I'm
seen the
so glad.
show.
Oh, great.
Beautiful, beautiful one.
So much. Well, the Cameron is a wonderful museum, and I'm so honored to be hanging in that beautiful space and that beautiful countryside. Wow, I want to go back and just hang out and study your terrain.
Yes, yes. Let's all go kayaking to Masonboro.
Oh yeah.
Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy St.
Happy
Patrick's
Patty's
Day.
Day to you all.
And we'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.